Hi everyone, my name is Sean Fawcett. I'm a work-based learning coordinator at San Diego Mesa College. Hopefully you've already viewed our introduction to work-based learning and overview of our services. This workshop will talk about resume tips and everything that you need to know in order to prepare your resume and enter the workforce. So first and foremost, what is a resume? So a resume is a brief sales marketing tool, really self-marketing, identifying what your summary of your education, your background, your experiences, everything that you bring to the table for an employer to see. It's typically used to get your foot in the door for an interview. So nowadays, every job that you apply for, 99.9% of them will require a resume. And you want to make sure that it shouts hire me and not file me. We'll talk about some ways that you can make sure that you do that so that your resume is engaging, that it's interesting, that it also showcases all the value and the skill sets that you bring to the table. How do you prepare to write a resume? First and foremost, you need to read the job description. This is really important and actually necessary for you in order to start writing your resume. Oftentimes you'll see or hear of students or other people having just one resume that they apply for every job. And that can be really challenging in being able to find employment. You want to make sure that you're reading the job description first and foremost to assess your qualifications and your skills related to the job. So if you know that maybe you don't have a ton of work experience, but you're applying for a management or a supervisory level position, does that match up with your qualifications and your skills? You want to make sure that you're shooting for employment opportunities that are going to align with the level of experience that you have, the level of skill, to make sure that you're making yourself competitive within the candidate pool. The other reason it's important to read the job description is to make sure that it's a good fit for you. Is this a job that you're interested in? Do you think that the responsibilities or tasks sound interesting, sound like something that you would be good at? And also, do they match up with previous work experience? It's also really important for you to align your resume with every single job that you're applying for. And so that means that you're actually tailoring your resume to whichever job that you're applying. So I'll say that again, you do need to tailor your resume to each job that you apply for. That does take a lot of time and energy and effort on your part, but trust me, it will absolutely help in being able to showcase your skill set and be picked up and discovered by employers for your talent. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's super important, especially today. And lastly, it's important for you to choose the best fit of your resume format, and we'll talk about what some of those options might look like. Next, you want to really consider what your skills are. What value do you bring to the workforce? And so if I asked you right now what your top 3 skills were, really think about that question. What have you learned in your education? What have you learned in your extracurricular activities? And don't sell yourself short. I often work with students on this question, and many students struggle to be able to say what their top skills are. You absolutely have skills. You bring a lot to the table. It's just a matter of thinking about what it is that you've done, your experiences, both inside and outside the classroom, and identifying what and being able to articulate what those skills are. This is a list from monster.com. They've developed the top skills in demand for 2020 and moving forward. So you can see problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people management. So they're all dealing with others on a team, as well as being able to think outside the box. Communicating with others is always going to be really crucial. So you want to be able to make sure you understand who you are and your value, because you need to be able to write those skills within your resume. So some resume format options. Chronological resume is kind of what it sounds, kind of the standard format that you'll see for resumes, which is where you're going to list your work experience from the most current job to your latest job. Functional resume actually has you focus more so on your skill set. So it's not so much emphasizing the actual employment opportunities and specific dates that you've worked, but more so of looking at, again, what skills, what experiences that you bring to the table to allow you to stand out within that candidate pool. And then a combination is just that, combining the two. So it's really important for you to kind of think where you are within your career path and your career development, how much work experience you have, and that will kind of dictate which resume format that you might choose. So next, we're going to jump into some of the components of a resume. So first and foremost, a resume header is probably one of the most important things on a resume. This is going to indicate your first and last name, your home address, your phone number, email address. Those are really crucial because the employer, if they see something that they like or all the skills that they're looking for, they need a way to be able to contact you. You can also include a personal website, but only if this is applicable. So meaning if you just have some random website that you've created, you don't want to include that. As long as the website is professional and is relevant to the job that you're applying for, then yes, you can absolutely include that. I oftentimes recommend students to include their LinkedIn profile, but only include that link to your LinkedIn is if you're active on the platform, meaning that you are on there regularly, you post pretty frequently, you like things, you're sharing content. If you just have an account and you have like 5 connections, then probably not really worth it for you to include it, but definitely need to address all the other information here. As you can see in this sample, the header is in the center of the page. It's bold, it's larger font, and that's pretty standard for most resumes because again, if I'm an employer, I'm reading through this resume and I see something that I like, I want to know exactly who to contact, and I know, okay, I'm going to contact Avery Autumn, and there is her contact information. Next is an objective statement, or also sometimes called a profile or a professional summary. This section is optional. An objective typically shows, or is a 1 or 2 sentence statement that shows an employer what you want and what you have to offer. And so you can include an objective. Sometimes it's a little redundant because you're often stating that you want to apply for a particular position in a particular industry or company. So obviously you're applying for the job. So it's kind of redundant in that sense that you're stating what it is that you're looking for. But it is a great opportunity for you to showcase your skills. My personal preference, rather than an actual objective statement, I would prefer to see on a resume a summary of skills or that tied to a particular job. And so we could talk a little bit about that. So some examples on an objective, again, you're going to combine the position with the skills that you provide. So something that is not super great as an objective, I am seeking an entry-level position with my chosen field of personnel work. I mean, yes, it tells the employer what you're looking for, but it's not super specific. I don't really, reading that statement, I don't really know who this applicant is or what they bring to the table. Something that would be more effective is seeking a challenging position as a technical recruiter, offering skills in interviewing, occupational assessment, and employee supervision. So you can see that's a little bit more robust statement. It really identifies exactly what the person is after, what skills that they bring to the table, and what they're looking for as far as a position. So this is definitely a great objective. So the next section that you want to include is your education. So you all are students at Mesa, so you absolutely should include this section here. You want to identify the school, location, and major, and that is for every school that you've attended. And so you are all college students at this point, so you no longer need to include your high school work. However, you do want to include multiple campuses if you're attending such. You do want to include your actual or expected graduation date. So as you can see here in this example, this person earned a certificate of achievement in December 2017. If you are planning to graduate in the spring semester, it would say expected graduation spring 2021 or May 2021 for a specific date. You also have the opportunity in this section to emphasize related coursework or class projects. So this is really crucial, especially if you don't have a ton of work experience, or maybe you have work experience in retail or hospitality in the restaurant industry, and you're transitioning into a more kind of a different industry as far as your professional career path. Then you can absolutely include relevant coursework here. Just one thing to point out, you don't want to include, the specific course number. So like Business 119 isn't going to be super relevant to an employer. Rather, you want to state the full course title. So business communications, accounting, managerial accounting, so that way they know exactly what coursework you've taken and kind of have an understanding of what you bring to the table at that point. Students can also include your grade point average if it's above a 3.0 or higher. If not, then you can just leave it off. That's fine. And then, as I mentioned, don't list your high school here. One thing that you do want to include is if you're earning multiple associate's degrees or multiple certificates, you want to include all of them listed here. And you also want to make sure that you're spelling out the full degree title. So oftentimes when I meet with students, I'll see that they have an AS in business administration. So rather than AS, you want to spell out Associate of Science degree, business administration. And then if you have a particular emphasis, then you also want to include that as well. That just gives some full context for the employer, especially if they're not as familiar with some of the educational lingo that we use and acronyms that we use in higher ed. So next, and probably the meatiest part of your resume, is going to be your experience section. So this will be based off your resume format and how you structure this. But for any specific position, you want to include your job title, employer, the city and state that you were employed in, and the dates of the employment. So you'll see here, that is exactly what this resume example lists. My personal preference would be to list your job title first and then your employer. You can see in this resume that they bolded the position, which is great, but it's not necessarily the first thing that you're seeing within that section. And so I personally would like to see the position first, because if I'm an employer, I want to know what that actual experience was, and then looking at the company is going to be the next important thing. You want to choose 3 to 5 bullets with action verbs to describe your specific responsibilities, skills, and accomplishments within each of your roles. And one thing to point out here, you want to make sure that whatever number of bullets you choose is going to be consistent. So you can see that this resume example doesn't necessarily do this, but the first 2 choices have 4 bullets, and then the third has 3 bullets. And so by choosing and being consistent with your bullets, you're showing attention to detail, but you're also showing consistency in the value of each employment opportunity and experience that you've held. So for me, when I first look at this, if I'm looking at it briefly, it kind of shows that maybe the top 2 experiences have a little bit more weight for this person rather than the bottom choice. So pick a number 3 to 5 and stick to that. Also, one thing to point out, that your experience is not limited to paid work. It can also include volunteer, community service experience, anything that is going to showcase your overall commitment to the field, your skill development and experience that you've had that is hands-on. So skills and keywords are going to be really crucial to your resume. As I mentioned, you do need to update your resume for every job that you're applying for. The company's job description, essentially you can think of that as like the ideal candidate that the company is looking for. So if you have a generic resume that you're just submitting to every job, it's not necessarily going to meet the qualifications that each company is looking for. And that will show when an employer is looking at your resume. So if I list certain qualifications as an employer, I want to make sure that all my candidates that I'm going to interview are actually touching on those points and actually have communication or critical thinking or collaboration skills, or they know a particular knowledge base. You do also want to be specific in describing your skills and experiences. This is something that students really struggle with. I often say that, we really want to be very specific. Explain in detail as if you're describing to someone outside the industry that really has no experience or knowledge of what your job is. You don't want to ever assume that the person that's hiring you will know what your experience entails based only on your job title. So for example, even if you have a part-time job as a sales associate or a server or a barista at Starbucks, most people are familiar with Starbucks, but you don't want to assume that they're going to know exactly what your role and your responsibilities were in that job. So, and don't ever sell yourself short. I often see this with students that they just list like one or two things. It's very vague as far as they're describing their experience and skill sets. You want to make sure that you're really talking yourself up. This is probably one of the only times in life where it's good for you to not be humble. You really want to boast about yourself and showcase what you bring to the table. Also, it's great if you can use quantitative terms when possible. So for example, if you state that you wrote news releases, okay, yeah, I see that you can do that. Rather than another option, wrote 25 news releases in a 3-week period under strict daily deadlines. You can see that the second example is much stronger statement. It gives quantifiable numbers. I can actually visualize what that person did within a specific period of time. So it makes it almost like a smart objective that they're stating, and it showcases exactly the amount of work that they are familiar with. So being under strict deadlines, being able to handle multiple projects, that shows a lot of things to an employer. So as often that you can include quantitative, I would recommend that. The other reason why skills and keywords are important is because of technology. There is a product called Applicant Tracking Systems, or ATS, which are readily available and prevalent within the hiring process. So this is a online software that when you apply online for any job, which typically about 90% of employment opportunities, you upload a resume online. They run your resume through this ATS tracking system, and your resume must match a certain amount or a certain percentage of the job description keywords or desired skills. And so if you're not tailoring your resume or you're not meeting that certain percentage of keywords or skill sets, then your resume will get tossed out and it will never be seen by human eyes. So again, I keep stressing that you want to update your resume and tailor it for every job that you apply for. This is one of the reasons why. So especially if you're applying for a large corporation, you can absolutely guarantee that they are using some sort of tracking system like this. Just to give you some kind of insight into the hiring process, on average, every corporate job, so a pretty large number, attracts 250 resumes. Yet only 4 to 6 of those people will be invited to an interview, and only 1 of those will be offered a job. 75% of recruiters in the industry that go through the hiring process use a recruiting or ATS system to narrow down the applicant pool. And as many as 75% of qualified applicants are rejected by these systems due to incorrect resume formatting or lack of desired keywords. So again, I do know that it does take time and effort for you to tailor your resume, but it will pay off in the long run because it'll open up more doors, more opportunities for you, and then give you the chance to be able to speak with someone in person through the hiring process. So normally, if I was doing this presentation for your class in person, I would have you do some hands-on activities, but just some job posting practice tips. I would recommend reading the job posting and highlighting or underlining keywords for skill sets, modes of communication, different aspects or things that stand out to you as far as what the qualifications are that the company is looking for. So to give you an example, this is a medical records technician, so I just chose a random job posting on Indeed. And so you can see I went through and I color-coded these to highlight some of the keywords and skill sets that the company is looking for. I did also break them up into different communication styles. So you can see there, they're color-coded by verbal, written, visual, or non-verbal communication. But I also included other job descriptions or job keywords that they're looking for as well. So if you can start getting into the habit of doing this as a student, it'll really help you in being able to tailor your resume because you're basically taking all of this content and putting it into your resume as long as it's applicable to you. This is something that I personally do in my own job hiring or job application process, and it has worked wonders. I actually go through, I highlight all the keywords, I update my resume based off this, and then I review my resume a second time, and I check off how many times I'm actually touching on each of these keywords to visually see that I'm actually placing them into my resume. So some optional headings that you can include within a resume, related coursework. So we talked a little bit about that. So you can see in this example here, they're putting out the full course titles rather than, again, not just the course numbers. Relevant projects or different hands-on activities that you've done, assignments in your classes, those are great. You can elaborate more in detail, especially if you don't have a ton of experience within the field. If you are an honors student, you can go ahead and include that. Any community service, volunteerism, study abroad opportunities that you've experienced. If you're a part of any clubs or association or leadership, both on campus as well as off campus. That is all great material for you to include within your resume. So some things to not include. Definitely never include your age or date of birth. Those are actually illegal questions within the hiring process. You don't want to include that. You don't need to include your addresses of former employers. Just the city and state of where you worked is totally fine. You don't need the full address, not necessary. You also don't want to use I statements. You actually don't use third person, you don't use first person. Everything is action oriented, so using action verbs. And if you need help with that, again, reach out to Work-Based Learning for assistance with resume reviews, or you can also go to the Career Center or meet with a career peer ambassador. You also don't need to include specific dates. So this refers to your actual employment or work history. Just the month and the year is fine. So rather than May 5th, 2016, just May 2016 is great. If you are currently employed at a work site, it would be May 2016 to present or -present. You also don't need to include references available upon request. This is something that used to be required on resumes. It's not kind of outdated at this point for a couple of reasons. Typically, it wastes space on a resume, and it's also kind of redundant. Like if you're applying for a job, the expectation is that you would go through the interview process. If they like you, that you're going to be expected to provide references. So it's kind of unnecessary to actually state it. The other reason too is oftentimes you're applying online. Many companies actually require you to list your references within the application process up front anyways. So adding it to your resume, again, is just a waste of space and it's kind of unnecessary. One important tip that I want to recommend is if you are going to list references on an application, or you plan on providing a company with references, you want to check in with that person. So especially if it's a professor or your former boss, you want to make sure that you've let that person know that you've put them down as a reference, and first ask and make sure that it's okay. And I usually suggest if you're applying for a new job, at that point, you do want to provide each reference with a copy of your current resume, and ideally the job description that you're applying for, interviewing for, because if that person gets called, then they're able to kind of identify what job you're applying for, and then also be able to highlight certain skills or value for you on your behalf when they get called as a reference check. So some formatting and other details. So Employers spend an average of 6 seconds reviewing an individual resume. So that is an incredibly short amount of time. So making sure that your resume is clean, it's structured well, and it follows some of these guidelines is going to be really important to make sure that you're standing out. You're absolutely able to kind of put your own flavor and flair to it to show your creativity within reason, and also depending upon the industry that you're applying for. One important note is that typically a 1-page maximum for entry-level jobs is expected. Sometimes I see students and they come in with 2 or 3 pages, which is great that you're able to kind of pull all that content together. But what I would recommend is for an entry-level job, typically if you have 10 years or less of experience, then just 1 page is kind of the standard rule. If you have more than 10 years of experience or you have a lot of robust experience, then 2 pages is fine. And again, that's an individual decision, so we can always talk with you about that depending upon your background and experience. You do want to use a standard letter page, 8.5 by 11. Some common fonts to use: Arial, Times New Roman, Calibri. These are all really great fonts. They are pretty standard. They're easy to read. They're kind of visually appealing. So choose one of those and stick to them. Choose one font to use consistently throughout your entire resume. You typically want to stick to size 10 to 12 font. Going bigger than that is only typically allowed for your header. Everything else should be within that standard font size. It is really important that you check the verb tense. So any of your previous positions are going to be in past tense. If you are currently employed at a work site and it is your job that you are currently at, then you can use present tense for those positions. You want to use margin, spacing, and organized content so that it's easy to read. So again, if an employer is only looking at your resume for an average of 6 seconds, and maybe education is the most important thing that they are looking for within a resume, they want to be able to find that information very quickly. And so you want your sections, your labeling to be very clear, distinct. So within 6 seconds, my eyes are easily able to go to whatever section is going to be most important to me. You don't want to bend, staple, or fold your resume. And then also make sure that you save your resume as a PDF document. Oftentimes I see students that submit their resume as a Word document, which is typically the platform that most students are using. But the problem with Word is when you upload your resume within an application, if you have Word, let's say 2010, and then you upload and whoever is downloading your resume has Word 2007, then that can be a challenge because sometimes the formatting gets a little screwed up. And so you want to make sure that if you save it as a PDF, the formatting actually just stays as is. So there's not going to be any issues when it transitions from your computer to the person that's hiring and their view. So lastly, just some reminders to be professional. So as far as your voicemail, you do want to make sure your greeting for the phone number you list is professional. First and foremost, I have to say this with students in today's world, it is really important that you pick up your phone, especially when you are entering the job market and you are applying for jobs. Most companies will call you. So I know I usually ask this, when we're in class, of how many students actually answer phone numbers that they don't know. And the majority of students do not. And I can attest to that. I do that myself. I kind of screen phone calls. But if you are applying for jobs, it's really important that you're able to answer the phone, but do so in a professional way. So you're not, answering it with like laughter, or if it's a really loud setting, you want to make sure that you're in a calm environment. So if you're not, then let it go to voicemail, but you do want to make sure that voicemail greeting is going to be professional. Your email, make sure that that conveys professionalism as well. So no more, cutie48@yahoo.com. Gmail is free, Yahoo is free. Basically, any email is free at this point. So first name dot last name at gmail.com, first initial last name at gmail.com. Something that's going to be a little bit more professional. If you haven't already done that, do it now, especially as a student, because you're already kind of in that professional realm, right? You're emailing your professors, you're emailing your MESA's campus. So it's better to have that now and be prepared. As far as your resume, you want to make sure that you're proofreading. So check for spelling errors, content, formatting. Make sure that you're reviewing your resume carefully for all of those things, and try to do so quickly so that you're kind of in the mindset of what a hiring person would look for. Most importantly, get feedback. So have a career counselor or work-based learning coordinator, a professor, a parent, visit the career peer ambassadors to be able to look at your resume before you submit it. Have at least one other person's eyes view your resume, because we often think that our work, is outstanding. We don't we overlook some of the errors that may be glaring to other people. So it's really great, especially from a formatting perspective, to make sure that your resume is easy to read and that it's understandable from someone that is not you writing it. And then lastly, just review. You do want to reread your resume before every interview. The chances are your interviewer did, so they may call you out on certain things. You want to make sure that you're familiar with that work, whatever you submitted, your skills, your value, everything that you bring to the table, because that'll help you be more confident within the hiring process. So those are some resume tips. I hope they were helpful for you today. One of the next workshops, we will talk about interview preparation. So I will see you soon.